My key stopped halfway inside the lock, like the house itself had decided I no longer belonged there. Rain slid down the back of my neck, cold and sharp. The kind of November rain Portland gives you when it wants to remind you that warmth is never guaranteed. I stood on the front porch of my childhood home in Lake Oswego, holding the old brass key my father had given me when I was 16, and for a few seconds I kept twisting it, gently at first, then harder, as if effort could change the truth. But the deadbolt did not move. The lock had been replaced, brand new, polished, shiny, cruel. My father, Edward Bennett, had died of a sudden heart attack 4 days earlier. His funeral was still 2 days away. I had come to pick up his charcoal suit, the one he always wore to board dinners and winter charity events, because I knew my mother would forget and my sister would not care. But before I could even step inside the house where I grew up, I learned that my family had already decided what I was allowed to touch. I stepped back from the door and looked through the wide front window. The living room lights were blazing. My younger sister, Vanessa, was sitting cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by grey file folders from Dad's private study. She was opening them one by one, sorting through them, like she was organizing a garage sale, instead of going through the private papers of a man who had not yet been buried. Near the liquor cabinet, her husband, Derek Hall, poured my father's bourbon into one of Dad's crystal glasses. He swirled it like he had earned it, and on his wrist, catching the amber light from the fireplace, was my father's vintage Omega Seamaster. I stood there in the rain, staring at that watch, and something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not yet, just quiet. I walked back to the door and knocked. Not loudly, not desperately. 3 firm knocks. After a moment, the porch light came on. The door opened 3 inches and stopped against the security chain. My mother, Marion Bennett, looked out at me. Her hair was perfectly pinned. Her cardigan was buttoned to the throat. Her eyes were dry. "Clara," she said, as if I were a neighbor who had arrived at an inconvenient hour. "What are you doing here?" I looked at the gap in the door, then at the chain. "My key doesn't work," I said. "I came to get Dad's suit for the funeral." She did not move. She did not apologize. She did not even pretend to be surprised. "Vanessa needed to secure the house," she said. "She's grieving. She has children to think about. Things are fragile right now." I looked past her shoulder, on the kitchen windowsill, exactly where it had always been, sat the blue tin of peppermint candies. That tin was older than my sister's marriage, older than my career, older than every excuse my mother had ever made for Vanessa. When I was a kid, every time Vanessa broke something, stole something, lied about something, Mom would open that tin, hand me a mint, and say, "Swallow it down, Clara. Don't make things ugly." That was how my mother raised me. Not to be loved. Not to be protected. To swallow. I looked at her and said, "Derek is wearing Dad's watch." Her mouth tightened. "Your sister has a family. Clara. You have your apartment. You have your job. You're strong enough to handle this without making it harder for everyone." Then she shut the door. The deadbolt clicked. I stood there in the rain for a long moment, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I did not scream. I did not bang on the door. I did not beg my mother to remember that I was her daughter too. I turned around, walked down the wet stone steps, got into my car, and drove away. My name is Clara Bennett. I was 35 years old that night, and I thought I had just lost my father, my home, and the last illusion that my family would ever choose me. But what I did not know was that my father had already predicted everything. He knew Vanessa would change the locks. He knew my mother would stand behind the chain. He knew Derek would reach for the watch before the funeral program had even been printed. And he knew that, if he left the visible estate unguarded, they would tear through it like wolves. So before he died, my father built a trap. Vanessa thought she was stealing a lakeside mansion, a Range Rover, and a dead man's fortune. What she actually stole was a $512,000 financial bomb, and the real inheritance: the land, the water rights, the turbine patent, the company worth millions, had already been locked inside a trust she could never touch. Before I tell you how my sister signed her own ruin with a silver pen, take a second to like this video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments: have you ever been the person your family only remembers when there is a bill to pay, a crisis to fix, or a mess to clean up? Because if you have, you will understand why I walked away from that porch without saying another word. 5 days after my father died, we met at a funeral home on the east side of Portland. The room smelled like lilies, furniture polish, and quiet judgment. Vanessa wore a black designer dress that still had the stiffness of something bought that morning. Derek sat beside her, checking his phone under the table. The fake confidence of a man who believed grief was just a business meeting with softer lighting. My mother held a tissue in one hand, but never used it. The funeral director slid the invoice across the desk. $18,400. Casket, service, burial preparation, flowers, transportation, the whole final bill for the man who had spent his life working so everyone else could be comfortable. The director explained that Dad's primary accounts were temporarily frozen pending estate processing. They needed someone to guarantee payment before they could release the arrangements. Vanessa looked at the invoice like it was written in another language. "Derek and I can't cover something like this," she said immediately. "The kids have expenses. And with the business still recovering, this is just impossible right now." My mother placed a hand on Vanessa's arm and nodded, as if my sister had said something brave. Then both of them looked at me. "Clara," my mother said softly, "you have a director's salary. Your father would want you to help the family." I stared at the invoice. 2 nights earlier, they had locked me out of my childhood home. Vanessa had been going through Dad's files. Derek had been drinking Dad's bourbon and wearing Dad's watch. And now they wanted me to pay to bury him. I picked up the pen. I signed the guarantee. I gave the funeral director my personal card. Vanessa let out the smallest breath of relief, the kind people release when a burden lands exactly where they expected it to land. That was my role in the Bennett family. If Vanessa created the fire, I carried the water. If Marianne wanted peace, I paid for it. If Derek needed time to build something, someone else had to fund the illusion. And if I ever questioned it, I was told the same thing in different words. "Clara, you're capable. Clara, you don't need help. Clara, be the bigger person." After the service, Vanessa found me near the church reception table, where the coffee had gone lukewarm, and the sandwiches curled at the edges. She did not look like a grieving daughter anymore. She looked like someone finalizing a renovation plan. "Mom and I talked," she said. "The house makes the most sense for us. The kids need the space. Mom will take the downstairs suite. Derek needs the Range Rover for investor meetings. You have your Pearl District apartment, so there's really no reason to complicate this." I watched her stir sugar into coffee she did not drink. "And my things?" I asked. "You can come by next weekend and get whatever boxes are left in the garage," she said. Then she smiled. not kindly. Dad would want the assets to go where they're actually needed. You know that. There it was, the family math. Vanessa's needs counted as destiny. Mine counted as inconvenience. I looked at my sister, at the expensive dress, the careful tears, the entitlement wearing grief like perfume, and I said, "Okay." She blinked. She expected anger. She wanted anger. If I raised my voice, she could tell everyone I was making Dad's death about money, but I gave her nothing. I walked away. 9 days after the funeral, rain hammered the windows of my apartment in the Pearl District, while I reviewed operating reports for a renewable energy project outside Salem. Numbers were clean. Contracts were clean. Machines either worked or they did not. That was why I liked my job. People could lie. Data rarely bothered. At Paul, 17 p.m. My doorbell rang. I checked the peephole and saw Nathaniel Price, my father's longtime attorney, standing in the hallway with a dark overcoat and an old leather briefcase. At the funeral, I had seen him speaking quietly with Vanessa and Derek. I had assumed he was one more person who had chosen the side with the bigger performance. Still, I opened the door with the chain on. Nathaniel looked exhausted. "Clara," he said, "I owe you an apology, and then I need to give you what your father left." I let him in. He set the briefcase on my kitchen island and opened it slowly. "The way I behaved at the funeral was intentional," he said. "Edward instructed me to appear cooperative with Vanessa and your mother. He wanted them to believe there would be no resistance." My throat tightened. "Why?" Nathaniel removed a thick envelope from the briefcase. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "For my steady girl, Clara." "Because," Nathaniel said, "your father wanted to see what they would do when they thought no one was watching." I opened the envelope. On top was a handwritten letter. My father's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but still precise. "My steady girl," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. And the people I failed to confront while I was alive have shown you who they are. I know your mother. I know your sister. And I know what they have asked you to swallow." I read the words standing at my kitchen island, rain tapping the glass behind me. And for the first time since his death, I felt something break open in my chest. Not grief, recognition. My father wrote that he had watched me work through college while Vanessa was sent to Milan for a 6-month design program paid for by a loan. My mother insisted was necessary for her growth. He wrote that he had watched me pay my own student debt while he quietly covered Vanessa's failed online furniture store, Derek's credit cards, their missed rent, their emergencies, their new beginnings that always looked exactly like their old mistakes. He wrote, "I let your mother convince me that keeping peace meant sacrificing fairness. I was wrong. So I built a wall they could not climb." Nathaniel placed documents on the island. The first folder contained the truth about the Lake Oswego house. It was not debt-free. Not even close. Years earlier, after Vanessa and Derek's business collapsed, my father had taken out a secured loan against the property to keep them from bankruptcy. The outstanding balance was $512,000. The second folder contained the vehicle records. The Range, Rover Vela. Vanessa had already started calling. Ours was not owned outright. It was leased through my father's old maintenance company and was 4 months past due. The third folder showed that the main checking account Vanessa thought contained liquid inheritance was tied to an exhausted credit line. Once the bank processed Dad's death certificate and the property transfer, the system would sweep what remained. Then, Nathaniel opened a small pouch and slid out a photograph of my father's Omega Seamaster. "The real one was sold 6 years ago," he said. "Your father used the money to file the first patent application." I stared at him. "Then the one Derek is wearing?" "A replica," Nathaniel said. "Worth less than $80. I almost laughed, but it came out as air. Derek had strutted around my father's funeral wearing a costume version of value. It suited him. Then Nathaniel placed one final binder on the counter. Black leather. No logo. No decoration. Inside were the documents for Bennett Hydro Holdings LLC. My father had inherited 270 acres of forested land near the Deschutes River, long before he married my mother. Over the years, he had secured water rights, developed a miniature hydroelectric turbine design, and patented a pressure-balanced system that could generate clean power in rural areas without large dams. He had transferred the land, the patent, and the early testing contracts into an irrevocable trust. The independent valuation was $5.6 million. Sole beneficiary: Clara Bennett. I could not speak. For years, I thought my father's silence meant he did not see me. But he had seen everything. He had seen the work, the swallowed anger, the times I was told I did not need help because I was strong enough to survive without it, and in the end, he had not left me a house. He had left me escape. But there was more. Nathaniel turned to a highlighted clause. "Edward built in one final test," he said. "If Vanessa allowed the visible estate to go through normal probate and agreed to divide it equally with you, the trust would clear the debt on the house, settle the vehicle lease, and create education funds for her children. She would have walked away with half of a clean estate." I looked up. And if she didn't? If she attempted to claim 100% of the assets by bypassing probate, signing a waiver, and excluding you, the trust would be permanently barred from using a single dollar to rescue those assets. Nathaniel closed the binder. "Your father did not punish Vanessa. He gave her a choice. Fairness would save her. Greed would expose her. 2 weeks after the funeral, Vanessa made her choice. We met in Nathaniel's downtown Portland office on the 23rd floor, with the river grey beneath the windows. Vanessa arrived in a cream blazer, Derek in a navy suit that looked rented, and Marianne with her handbag pressed against her ribs like armor. Clara, the inconvenient witness, was seated quietly near the end of the table. Nathaniel distributed the documents and said, clearly, slowly, and with enough force that no one could pretend later they had not heard him, "I strongly advise against signing this today. If you bypass probate, you accept the assets as they are, including any hidden liabilities, liens, payment obligations, or debt acceleration clauses attached to them. A full audit protects you." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Dad paid off that house years ago." Derek tapped the signature line. "Just sign it, babe. The kitchen contractor needs the deposit by Friday." Marianne said nothing. She only nodded at Vanessa, the way she had always nodded when the wrong daughter was about to be rewarded. Vanessa signed. Derek signed. Marianne witnessed. Nathaniel notarized. I watched the pen move across the paper, and I remember thinking that greed has a sound. It sounds like ink scratching across a page someone refused to read. After that, Vanessa entered her little kingdom. For 2 weeks, she lived as if she had inherited an empire. She posted a photo standing in front of the Lake Oswego house, with one hand on the Range Rover's hood. Her caption read, "Dad left us a legacy. New chapter. Blessed beyond words." She called interior designers. She scheduled a kitchen demolition. Derek drove the Range Rover to investor meetings he had invented in his own mind. Then Vanessa texted me and told me to clear my junk from the garage before Sunday, because they were converting the space into a home studio and wine room. I went. I packed 3 boxes: old medals, a jacket of Dad's that still smelled faintly like cedar, a photograph of the 2 of us beside the Deschutes River, and one of his engineering notebooks. From upstairs came the crash of a hammer against tile. Derek was tearing out a kitchen attached to a house the bank was about to reclaim. I paused at the garage door. For 1 second, the old reflex rose in me. Warn them. Fix it. Stop the disaster. Then I remembered the chain on the door, the funeral bill. My mother saying I was strong enough to handle it alone. So I loaded the boxes into my car and drove away. At the beginning of December, the banking system did what people like Vanessa never understand systems do. It followed the documents. At 2, 사십이 A. Min. Vanessa texted me. Did you freeze Dad's account? My card just declined at the furniture store. I did not answer. At 11, 18 a.m. She sent a photo of a certified letter on the kitchen counter. The headline read, "Notice of default and demand for payment." The balance? $512,000. Due within 45 days. The text beneath it said, "Clara, what is this? Tell me, this is fake." I placed my phone face down on my desk. By mid-afternoon, the leasing company contacted them about the Range Rover. By evening, Derek had taken the Omega to a watch dealer, hoping to use it as collateral for a bridge loan. The dealer opened the case, looked inside, and laughed him out of the shop. The watch was a replica, a cheap one. That night, my phone became a storm. In 48 hours, I received 103 missed calls, 64 text messages, and 15 voicemails. Vanessa began with orders. Fix this. Call the bank. Release the funds. Then came panic. We're going to lose the house. The kids are crying. Then blame. You planned this. You were always jealous. Derek threatened lawsuits he could not afford. Marian left trembling messages about family duty. Your family needs you, Clara, she said, using the same voice she had used my entire life when she wanted my money, my time, my silence, or my spine. I created one group chat with all 3 of them and typed 3 sentences. You accepted the assets against legal advice. The debts attached to them are your responsibility. Do not contact me again. Then I blocked them. For the first time in my adult life, the silence that followed did not feel lonely. It felt clean. But people who live by taking do not stop when the door closes. They start looking for windows. 2 days later, Vanessa and Marianne appeared in the lobby of my office building. I worked as an operations director for a renewable energy firm, and our lobby was all glass, polished concrete, and quiet professionalism. They could not have looked more out of place. Vanessa's hair was messy, her coat wrinkled, her face stripped of the curated softness she used online. Marianne clutched a tissue and scanned the room for witnesses. She had always loved witnesses. Public embarrassment was her favorite weapon. When I was a child, if I resisted giving Vanessa something, Mum would make a scene in a grocery aisle, crying loudly until strangers looked at me like I was cruel. She expected me to fold in front of receptionists, interns, colleagues, and security. I did not. Vanessa stepped toward me. You blocked us, she snapped. The bank is taking the house. You need to wire the money today. No, I said. Marianne put a hand to her chest. Clara, your father would be ashamed. Your sister has children. You cannot let them be homeless over a grudge. I looked at my mother, and for the first time, I did not hear a mother. I heard a manager trying to recover a lost resource. I opened my briefcase, removed the signed waiver, and held it where they could see it. Then I spoke clearly enough for the lobby to hear. Vanessa changed the locks on my father's house before his funeral. She went through his private files while Derek wore his watch and drank his bourbon. They left me to pay $18,400 to bury him. Then signed this document against legal advice, so they could take 100% of the visible estate. The debt is theirs. I will not liquidate my life to fund their greed. The lobby went silent. Marianne's tears stopped. Vanessa looked around and realized the audience had not become her weapon. It had become mine. Security escorted them out. I went back upstairs and finished my meeting notes. A week later, they tried one final move. Vanessa and Derek hired a small-time attorney named Calvin Rusk and filed notice of a civil complaint alleging fraud, concealment, and deceptive inheritance practices. They claimed Nathaniel and I had hidden debts and tricked them into signing in the conference room. Calvin arrived with a cheap briefcase and the confidence of a man who had only heard one side of a lie. He announced that they would seek dissolution of the trust and claim half of Bennett Hydro Holdings. Nathaniel listened politely. Then he opened his file. First, he produced Derek's emails demanding an immediate transfer and asking to bypass the probate audit. Then the written warning Vanessa had signed. Then the meeting notes. Then the trust clause. His voice was calm when he said, "If your clients had agreed to divide the visible estate equally, the trust would have cleared the mortgage, paid the vehicle obligations, and provided education funds for the children. But they did not want equal. They wanted everything. Their own signatures activated the clause that prevents this trust from rescuing them." Vanessa stared at the paper like it had changed languages. Derek went pale. Calvin Rusk stopped smiling. Nathaniel looked at him and said, "If you file this complaint, I will seek dismissal with prejudice, sanctions, and referral to the state bar for failure to perform basic due diligence." Calvin closed his briefcase. "I'm withdrawing representation," he said. Vanessa shouted his name as he left, but the door closed behind him anyway. Their last weapon had walked out of the room. After that, Marianne came alone. She arrived at my apartment building in a taxi, carrying the blue peppermint tin. Not a Range Rover. Not a driver. A taxi. She looked smaller than I remembered, but not softer. Desperation can imitate humility when it needs a place to sleep. She told me the house was unbearable. Derek was punching walls. Vanessa was screaming. Certified letters came every day. The car was gone. The heat bill was overdue. Then she told me Vanessa had manipulated her, as if she had not stood behind that chain herself. "You have a guest room," she said. "I could stay with you for a while. We could start over, just us." Then she opened the tin and offered me a peppermint. The smell hit me like childhood. All the little injustices, all the times I was told to swallow pain, so Vanessa would not have to face consequences. I looked at the candy, then at my mother. "I've swallowed enough," I said. Her hand trembled. "Clara, I am your mother, and you are exactly where you chose to be," I said. "You told me I was strong enough to handle things alone. You were right. I told her I was leaving Portland after closing the Cedar Line deal. I told her I would not leave a forwarding address. Then I handed the tin back. "Keep them," I said. "You may need something to swallow." In March Ichanishibi, the bank posted foreclosure notice on the Lake Oswego house. Vanessa and Derek had 72 hours to leave. They could not afford professional movers, so they rented a battered truck and carried their things out while neighbors watched from behind curtains. The Range Rover was gone. The social media posts were gone. The legacy had become cardboard boxes, unpaid bills, and a credit score in free fall. They moved into a 780-square-foot apartment near the industrial edge of Portland, beside a rail crossing and a row of warehouses. Derek took a night shift at a distribution center. Vanessa, who had once told me I did not need space because I did not have a family, now had 2 children, sharing one small bedroom, and a husband sleeping through daylight because he spent his nights loading freight. Marianne slept on a pull-out sofa. The queen of the house had become a guest in the ruins of her own favoritism. Around that same time, the Lake Oswego house went to auction. I attended. I had already received the first licensing payment from Cedar Line Renewable Systems, and if I wanted to, I could have bought the house back without effort. I stood at the back of the crowd, with my hands in my coat pockets, while investors raised their paddles. For a moment, I imagined reclaiming it, changing the locks, walking through the rooms as the rightful owner. But then I saw the porch in my mind, the chain, my mother's face, Vanessa on the rug with Dad's files, Derek's fake watch, the blue tin on the kitchen windowsill. That house was not home. It was a museum of everything I had been forced to survive. So when the auctioneer called going once, going twice, sold, I did nothing. I let a stranger take it, and with the strike of that gavel, the last physical piece of my old life left my hands. A month later, I sat in the boardroom of Cedar Line Renewable Systems and signed the final agreement. $6.3 million in total value. Partial sale of the turbine patent rights. Retained equity in the deployment program. And a strategic advisory position. Across the table, the executive shook my hand and told me my operational knowledge would help them scale the technology across rural energy markets. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that Derek Hall had applied for a mid-level sales management job there and had been rejected after one interview because he could not explain a single real revenue model from his so-called startup career. I looked out the window and let the irony settle quietly. Derek had worn a fake watch to feel powerful. Vanessa had stolen a house filled with debt to feel chosen. My mother had protected the weakest person in the family until weakness became a weapon. And I, the daughter they called too strong to need anything, was the one sitting at the table where real value was recognized. Before leaving Portland, I packed my apartment. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found my father's letter. I read it one last time. The final line said, "Do not let them call your survival selfish." I folded the paper carefully. Then I placed it in the small fireplace and lit the corner. I watched the flame eat through the ink. I did not burn it because I hated him. I burned it because I did not want to carry proof of pain into a life that no longer required evidence. I knew what had happened. I knew who I was. That was enough. In the summer of Ichinishibi, I drove east toward Bend, Oregon. Portland disappeared behind me in the mirror, gray and wet and heavy with ghosts. Head The sky opened wide over dry, high desert, pine ridges, and clean light. I bought a small timber house outside Bend, not a mansion, not a trophy, just a quiet place with land, wind, and mornings that belonged entirely to me. I advised Cedar Line. I funded technical scholarships for young women entering clean energy fields. Sometimes I drove to the Deschutes River and stood by the water, listening to the current turn over stones, thinking of my father building something in silence because he did not know how to apologize out loud. That Christmas Eve, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Are you proud of yourself?" I knew it was Vanessa. I could see her in that small apartment, still trying to make me the villain because the alternative was facing herself. I held the phone for a moment. Then I blocked the number and set it down. I did not need to answer, because the truth was simple. I was not proud that Vanessa lost the house. I was not proud that Derek ended up loading boxes on the night shift. I was not proud that my mother had to live inside the consequences of the child she created. I was proud that when the old call came, the call to fix, to pay, to swallow, to rescue, I finally did not move. I did not take back the house, I took back my life. And sometimes that is the only inheritance that matters. If this story hit something deep in you, if you have ever been called selfish for refusing to clean up a mess you did not make, leave a comment below. Tell me what boundary changed your life. And remember this: some people only call it family when you are useful. The moment you stop paying the cost of their choices, they will call you cruel. Let them. Their version of you is not your prison. Your peace is not a betrayal. And surviving the people who tried to pull you under is not something you ever need to apologize for.